it's this story that it's able to grab our attention, keep our attention, create an emotional connection, make it memorable, and engage us in a way that speaks with us, that we feel like we're a part of that story. Welcome to the Marketing Mirror podcast, where we help guide and navigate you through the ever-changing world of marketing. So, no smoke and mirrors here, just the unfiltered truth served with a side of wit. Welcome everybody to the Marketing Mirror podcast. I am your host, Matt Bork, and I am one of the content creators and I would say chief listening officer at Search and Rescue Marketing Agency. And I'm joined with the absolutely brilliant Ali Matos. She's one of the content creators and incredible humans as well on our team. I'm proud to say that. How you doing, by the way?
I'm good.
Yeah, you doing okay?
Glad to be here today. Great. Doing fantastic today.
Awesome. I'm super proud that Search and Rescue is kind of putting this on, and that it's something that's been long coming. And I love that we're able to dive into topics that we hear every day on shoots. And I think that that's one of the cool things. I actually do love that aspect of what we do, is that when we go on location to shoot with clients, that I think some of our clients have caught on that they can kind of pick our brains while we're there and get us to consult as we're shooting. And I love being able to do that. And today's topic is one that I know is absolutely close to your heart. I know it's close to my heart. I also know that there's a lot of questions around it when we do talk about it, which the topic we're going to talk about today is the art of engaging storytelling. And that word, again, to storytelling, is one of those things that people ask quite a bit. What is that? I don't even know what it is. And so I thought that we'd start with that. Do you want to start with what does it mean to you? Do you want me to start with it? I mean, I could go into like what kind of the dry narrative of it is. And I actually wrote it down as storytelling in social media marketing refers to the strategic use of narrative techniques to convey a brand's message or values through compelling and engaging stories.
Wow, that was so generic. That was generic. I think it was because of your voice too. I
was trying my best.
Your commercial voice. Yeah.
Storytelling.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So so to you, if somebody says to you and says, well, what is storytelling? Where would you start?
Honestly, I would start at the very beginning. Okay. So I would start at just yourself. I think that we can get in our heads quite a bit when it comes to trying to figure out how we're going to portray our story. I think, the conversations that you and I've had for years talking about how it has to be this perfect craft and it's got to look a certain way and it's got to have all the bells and whistles. And I think we need to remove all of that when we talk about storytelling, especially in the beginning. And something that we tell our clients a lot of the time is to stop looking outwards, like stop looking at what other people are doing, because you are unique in yourself. Storytelling comes from your heart. It leads with emotion, and it is something that is unique as yourself. So I like to explain storytelling, much like your DNA, much like your blueprint of your life, is that you are unique as yourself. There is no other person on this amazing, beautiful planet that is like you. And so when we kind of remove everything and we kind of just sit with like, who am I? How do I show up and what do I experience? And we remove that piece. That I think is when we can actually truly tell our story, and our personal stories is what kind of overflows into who we are in our brand or business. So storytelling to me is a very raw, authentic, open story of our lives, a narrative of our lives. And just we're picking those pieces and building it into more of a, maybe like a shorter story of how we show up in our lives and in our business with our community. Yeah,
that's cool. I don't want to add anything to that because I think that's awesome. I think that
I want to know I want to hear. Nice try, Matt. Nice try. I want to hear. Thanks for tuning in.
It's interesting because as you were speaking, I was just thinking of, I think of my girls all the time. They say like, where your mind wanders, that's where your heart is. And my mind is constantly wandering and thinking of them. And it goes to the memories that I have with them. And it goes to thinking of what they're doing even right now. And I start to develop these stories in my brain. And it's interesting because it hits a different part of your brain. And that's what storytelling does. When I sit with the girls and they watch a movie and I just sit and I stare at them, I don't even watch the movie. I just stare at them because they're so enveloped in a story. That story, I think it's this little part of your brain that's right by your ear. I have no idea about the brain. So I think it's in that area, but it pulls us in. And it's this story that it's able to grab our attention, keep our attention, create an emotional connection, make it memorable, and engage us in a way that speaks with us, that we feel like we're a part of that story. And when we feel like we're part of that story, it's interesting because, I've spent many times just crying watching my girls watch something. I'm not even watching the show. And I've turned to think, well, what are they looking at? And it's interesting because once I realize what they're looking at, it doesn't speak to me at all because it's not content that speaks to me, but they're engaged in it. And I can see that this story has really drawn them in. And it, again, just reinforces the power of storytelling that, especially when it's done, as you mentioned, with authenticity and with true transparency and with empathy and with speaking from your heart. Right? Like when you truly share, you're not putting on something, you're not trying to be something, you're just being who you are. You engage and you connect, and storytelling is just such an incredible way that we're able to grab people's attention. And I actually, it's interesting when we first talked about speaking about the art of storytelling. And I think that, like I've even shared this with you in the past, is that it kind of annoys me, to be honest, because that word gets thrown around so much. It's just another one of these keywords in marketing, which is also why we've chosen to talk about it, because a lot of people get confused with it. They get a little nervous. Well, what am I supposed to share? And they think everything's a story. And then they start to go, well, I've created all this content. I've created all these stories, but it's not moving the dial at all. It's not nudging people in any way to come into my business, to use our services, our products, whatever it may be. And so I do want to kind of dive into that a little bit with you, because I do think that or people get nervous. Well, I don't want to share every part of my life. I mean, you hear that quite a bit as well. So that's one of the things that I think that, like, I did want to just go back to one little thing as well, that if people are still struggling with the power of storytelling, is just think back to a movie and how quickly that movie has either grabbed your attention and kept your attention or lost your attention. And when you're able to look at that, like if it's lost your attention, why? Again, that's listening, right? It's like, why did it lose my attention? It's usually because the story is gone. There's no story and the story has lost you. Or, I mean, you've probably had it as one I have as well, where you're watching, I kind of laugh because it's like you're watching a movie or you're watching a TV show. You're like, this is awesome. And about like 6 minutes in, you're on your device and you're already looking at social and you're scrolling through things. The story's lost you. And so what I always like to look at is when we talk to clients is talking about them and who they are and how they're able to utilize storytelling. And again, it's a tool. And that's one thing that I love teaching people, is how to utilize it. And it's one of those things that we've talked about, even in the first podcast, we talked about it's a muscle. You need to use it. And the more that you use it, the more that you become comfortable with it. And the more that you'll recognize story in so many places that you didn't realize was there.
Yeah, well, I wanted to dive a little bit into, because I do agree with you. Like when we talk about storytelling, it's been around since the beginning of time, right? Like we've used storytelling in a way because it is memorable. Yeah. The reason why storytelling works, we know that it works, is because it strikes emotion. Yeah. And when when you talk about now business and in marketing, why I purchase a product, why I support a business, why I will show up to certain parts of my community, is all because of a certain story that kind of draws us in, right? Yeah. It leads with emotion. I'm now connected, and it kind of gets stored, like we said, in our storytelling part of our brain, because we know this, right? There's proven data that talks about how a compelling story, and if you're a good storyteller, how that really will draw people in. And so I want to talk a little bit about, like, even just starting to create your story or crafting. If you're a business owner listening that has no idea, we'll discuss a little bit about how to become a better storyteller. If you are a business or, a person in your brand who already has an idea of their story, but just needs, some tips and tricks of how to show up. I think really just talking about putting our audience first. That's the first thing I'm going to say when we're talking about crafting our story, right? Again, removing all the bells and whistles and just kind of writing out our life story. That's what we've done with our clients. We're like, you don't know where to start? Sit down, write down, everything that you've kind of come across in your life, different instances, special moments that have popped up that you're like, this is something that's important that I want to share. And then really discussing of how you want to kind of deliver it. It's all about the delivery, right? When we're talking about storytelling. So I would say the first thing in our tip of storytelling is putting our audience first. I would say that because it is emotional, right? It's taking that person on the emotional journey with us, taking them through, right? Like, I want to feel like I'm on the journey with you. Another thing that I think is a big, like, mishap that a lot of people will kind of maybe, like, not necessarily, I don't believe a mistake, but something that kind of maybe is just kind of, washed over, is not really sharing kind of the downs of our life. So when we talk about even social media and talking about our stories, I know that a lot of times we've heard this often is that this is like a highlight reel. So people will share parts of their life, but it's all amazing things.
Right.
And that's proven also for people not to connect with all the time. Like I want to show up online and I want to see people struggling. And I know this sounds so awful, but it's like, how I try to describe is to know that one, you're human, like you're gonna go through things, and seeing someone go and seeing how they overcome that is absolutely inspiring. Yeah. And so when we talk about storytelling, that's a huge piece, is showing that you've been through some things and showing how you've overcome it. To me, that's more of a connection in the storytelling than anything else. And I would say my final thing when we talk about storytelling that I feel is very impactful is stop overthinking and just to show up. We talk about this all the time. We talked about in our last episode about the art of listening is just to start, right? And I think, again, we overthink it so often, and there's going to be so many ads in marketing that are like, follow these 4 simple rules, follow these 5 rules. And then we get so like over our head and we're buying all these, ebooks and these courses on how to storytell. And it's like, it all starts with you, right? Showing up as your authentic self. So I think like, to me, that's, I would say is like the big piece of it is just really just starting and really just sharing who you are from your heart, like you had said earlier.
Yeah. No, I think that's beautiful. And I think one of the things that you just mentioned, there's quite a bit of stuff actually that I wanted to bring up as you're talking, but it was beautiful how you put it. And I think that showing up as yourself, though, is something that's scary for a lot of people. And that's why I think a lot of people do struggle with storytelling, is because they end up wanting to, it's much like, as you know, I'm not a huge fan of doing portraits. And there's a reason. It's because my heart breaks. You got to be a magical person for that. And I know that you're fantastic at it, but a lot of times people want a portrait of themselves the way they want to be perceived. They want to take a photo and they want to be perceived a certain way. And I always think people are they're all beautiful. And I think what people do a lot of times with storytelling is they go, I'm going to share this story. It's awesome. And it's exactly what you explained about all the successes. It's all the things that are, they're awesome. And the thing is that in my life where I'm at, if I'm wanting to, I don't know, I can't give her like an example off the top of my head. Let's just say I'm wanting to scale some mountain and I've never done it. I don't even know where to start. I don't want somebody that's on top of that mountain going, look at how awesome I am. It's just, I'm so awesome. And you guys should just look at how awesome and want everything that I have because I'm just so awesome. What I need is for somebody to say, listen, I understand where you're at because I've been there. And you need to just start here and maybe look out for this. And you're going to need this. You don't actually need that. And like when you're able to do those things through storytelling, it brings people along on the journey. And so going back to what I was originally like thinking was, I think a lot of people get really nervous. We talked about like being who you are, truly who you are. Just for breathing air, waking up in the morning and just being accepted for breathing air. That's a scary thing. And so when we think I'm going to put myself out there on social to help my business to engage in a way utilizing storytelling, I'm not really too happy with who I am. So I'm going to just portray this. But the problem is that your target audience is much smarter and they smell it out. Hence why a lot of times people will say things like, we have no engagement. And I've been trying to use storytelling. It's like, right, but you're trying to use it in a way that's manipulative. And anytime that you use any sort of manipulation in marketing, people sniff it out. And that's one of the worst things. Marketing should never be manipulative, ever. Our job is just to like come alongside people and to guide them. And so I think that utilizing storytelling in a way that it's not just as well, because there is also just traditional marketing techniques that we can sprinkle in. And I think that people forget that you can use storytelling for things like authority, memorability, engagement, education, information. They just seem to think it's not just about sitting back and being like, what little story could I tell? Like it isn't that. And I think that one of the things I love that you mentioned is just starting, right? Like, again, it's that fear of starting. So being yourself and realizing that like, you're awesome. If you're listening to this right now and you're worried, I think you're awesome. And I think that you got this. And I think that I get nervous of every word that's coming out of my mouth right now that I'm going to sound like an idiot because I want to add value to people's lives. I don't want to just ramble. So I get nervous, right? And I think that's okay. And we all understand when we see somebody that's on that screen going, man, it isn't easy to get on that side of the screen and put yourself out there. But it's also not easy to start a business. And it's not also easy to maintain a business and to have employees and to bring in services and products. And all of that stuff is incredibly difficult. And I think it's incredible. People should be praised for, it's not easy being an entrepreneur, for owning businesses.
No.
So maybe look back and realize, wow, look at how far I've come just in the life of my business, connecting the dots, right? Turning around, looking back and going, I've done all that. So taking that one little step to go, I'm going to try this. I'm just going to be me. I'm not going to worry about screwing up. I remember hearing this hilarious quote that said, you know, if you're creating content and you're worried about how your thighs look, you've already missed out on your target audience. And I thought that's one of the funniest things. But it's so true, because you're thinking me, and you're not thinking about them. I don't know. Does that bring anything else? Like bring anything up?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think like it's so interesting, because I think I'm always listening to like when you're talking about, like just showing up as yourself. Like that's like the common thing that we try to share at SNR is to show up. Like we always ask like why, right? You and I always ask that, like whenever we're sitting in strategy sessions with our clients, we're trying to build out their story. We're like, why? And then they'll say something and we're like, yeah, but why? Right? You and I've talked about this so many times about how we keep asking why, because it gets to kind of like the reasoning behind something, so that when you're showing up, for instance, when you're saying, well, I want to share the story, it's like, but why? Like, what's the value here? Like, you know, what's your intention behind this? And when we start to kind of like peel back the layers, it's like, okay, now we get an answer. Sometimes it's just because, well, I thought it was cool, or like, you know, and again, it's like really just kind of crafting and showing up, right? Starting and showing up. But I think what's really cool too is just being able to connect with your people, right? Like how do we connect is by like kind of removing all those things that kind of define who we are and get down to like the reason why you started your business. What is your passion and what drives you, right? It's always like, what's your why, right? And when you think about that, it's actually not sometimes directly related into the business, which is so funny. So when you're talking about like your girls and your family and your wife, like it's literally about who you are, right? Like, and I think that's why sometimes when we talk to people about businesses and like, they're like, oh, well, I want to share my story and I'm not too sure. It's like, there's this kind of like misconception that you have to, like be someone you're not. If you don't know who you are in your life and who you are as a person, it's really hard to tell your story as a business owner when you're not too sure who you are, right? Because that's, I think, where there's this massive disconnect of when someone's like, well, I don't know how to share my story in my business, when they're still trying to figure out like who they are. So I think there's a lot of groundwork that happens in the background with trying to figure out like why, right? We talk about why all the time. So asking the question of like, why did I start? What's my intention? What's my purpose? How am I adding value to my community? And then when you start to realize like who you are, you're able to tell the story in a much better light because you're very confident and strong in your values. Values are really, really huge in storytelling. But I wanted to, I think it would be really great. Let me just say, before you go there, one of the thoughts that I had was like, because I completely agree with you on that. And it's like, having the opportunity to engage with people with your brand, ultimately, what are we wanting? And we want to be trusted, right? We want our brands to be trusted. Nobody cares about your brand's logo, about the font colors, about all those things. Like that's just stuff that we think that we care about because we're internal and we're so in it every single day that we think people care when we change a color on something when they don't. But ultimately, as business owners, the biggest thing for us is that we want people to trust us. So when people get a sense that you're not being you're not being honest, that you're trying to sell them on something. And we've all been there where we feel something like, man, you're just trying to sell me and it feels gross. We can feel it. That's when we have that disconnect and there's no trust. And ultimately every brand is after trust. We want to be trusted. And so you said earlier things like, why is it that there's this fear around sharing the process? Right. And so storytelling gets easier when like obviously like what we're creating here with this podcast is we want to be able to help lighten the load off people's shoulders and teach them little things that they can do and encourage them in areas. So it's like, listen, don't worry about screwing up. Don't worry about like I think it's awesome. Let's say that you own a restaurant. It's like if a chef tried 5 times to get a dish that he really liked, well, how cool would it be to see each one of those processes to get to where it is and be like, oh, I remember when they started there. And that's one of the things that, I mean, right now, I think it's absolutely adorable how people are so into Taylor Swift because they're like, I've been a fan forever. And they're so excited. That's the cool thing, is that they're a part of that journey of going through everything that they feel Taylor Swift has taken them on this journey.
So they feel this sense of ownership and that they trust her, that they know her, right? Like intimately know her. And I think that's where, as like a business owner, I love that you brought that up. It's like just understanding where you're at today, loving yourself for where you're at today. And then going, you know what? I'm going to take a step. I'm going to start sharing these things and recognizing stories and like why this hoodie that I'm wearing matters and why I like it and why I chose this graphic. And I'm going to start sharing these things in short, digestible bite size. Start small. You don't need it to be huge or big, but I do think I cut you off there, but I do think it'd be awesome to go through and kind of give a little bit of an example so that people are like, I still don't get it.
Yeah.
Because I do know a lot of people, of people think I don't get it. I don't understand. So I'm going to ask you, you can choose anything. Do you want to choose a hoodie company?
Sure. I mean, I feel like we could make it work.
Where would you start? Okay. So where would you start? If you're somebody that's like, I've never done this before, where would you start? You're a hoodie company. You're new.
I think like if I'm going to just be like fully, I'm like, Allie's starting a hoodie company. I think my first thing I would do is to check with my audience. Like I would actually check it with my community and be like, what do you want to see? Right. I would pick like a niche and then I would go to those people. Like if that's going to be my target audience, I need to figure out, like, I got to find places of where they're hanging out. I got to go where they live, where they're interacting, all those social things, and just like hang out with them. I'm not going to sell first in my mind. I'm like, no, I'm just hanging out with my people. I'm going to build like solid foundations of a relationship first before I'm going to be like, hey, what's up? I've got my hoodie. Because this is what happens to a lot of companies too, is that they spend all the time and money into marketing what they think is cool. And then all of a sudden they show up and they're like, here's my hoodies, people. And there's like crickets. And they're like, where's everybody? Like, I thought you're going to love my cool sweaters with my face on it. And you're like, hard pass. So I think for me, it's like, I would literally just go out in my community, volunteer, go to networking events, hang out in the places where your people are at, get information, collect all that data, and then do a bunch of tests on it and see how it goes. And I think that's the biggest like step for me. And the second part is my storytelling aspect, which is crafting of why I'm creating this. Like, what's my intention behind it to share with my people, so that when it's time for me to market myself, when it's time for me to market myself, it's never going to lead with, yo, look, I own a bunch of hoodies and I want to sell them. It's going to lead with my passions, right? Am I donating to some charities? Why did I start it? Did I start it because, my grandpa, left me with some money and I, started this business in his honor? Like what is the kind of foundations of that? And that's where that piece comes from as well. So I think it's like those two would be like how I would start.
That's awesome. I would say like one thing that I would add to that, because I think that's brilliant, is people are always nervous to share the process, as we've just talked about. And so even like if you own a hoodie company, it's usually because you like hoodies. Or if you don't, then that's interesting too. And there's a story there as well. But one of the things that I would say that I would recommend is just start. A lot of times people go, oh, I need to build this and I need to build this and I need to get established before I'll start sharing things. And that's not the case. I know for myself that I've always been somebody who, I skateboarded for a huge chunk of my life and I would just tear through clothing all the time. After a weekend, you'd go through a pair of shoes and jeans and a shirt easy. So I was always thrifting, but I was very strict with the textures. I still am to this day. And so I would go through and I would touch and I would feel textures, and I would know just by walking through thrift shops, I could just run my hand across and know I wouldn't even wear any of these, but that's the one I'd wear right there because of texture. So if I'm into hoodies, which I am, and I love that hoodie that you're wearing because I do like the texture of it, I would share about why I even chose the hoodies or the selection process, the way that I'm thinking, what I'm doing. And I would do it in my tone, in my personality, in my voice, in my, it's interesting because a lot of times people say, wow, when they're sharing stories, I even get emotional hearing people share their stories. And I realize that we need to understand that we don't get emotional. We are emotional human beings. So allowing that to come out in your excitement, in your worry, in your thoughts behind, it's all those things that again builds trust, because we trust people that we can relate to, and that we feel like that they're being honest with us. So those are the aspects that I would look at too, because you can say a little story would be, hey, here I am, I'm looking at all these like different hoodies and this is what I'm thinking. And that's it. And that's like content. And people look, well, that's not selling. It's like, that's not the point. The point is that what we're doing is like, if you look at your social feeds, if you look at your overall marketing strategy, and you realize it's sort of like your book, is that when you start a book, there's chapters, there's pages, and as it grows and evolves, we get more and more enveloped in the story, but everything is essential to keep building that story. And I think that's something that we forget, is that, I like going back sometimes with companies that I've just, I feel I've just discovered, and I go look through their feed. I'm like, oh, wow. And you can see their growth over time. That I think to me is like absolutely essential. Is you kind of go through a social feed, and it's understanding the story of who they are. And more than ever, we want to get to know who businesses are. We want to see the humans behind them. We want to understand their tone, their personality, what makes them tick, what they support, all the things that you've mentioned. And I think that storytelling, I've kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but storytelling is such an incredible way to connect with people in a way that'll grab their attention really, really quickly. And we know too, like, again, there is just so much noise being thrown at you that now, to be honest, that we're seeing that the more authentic you can be, stands out. It stands out immensely.
Yeah.
And I think absolutely. That, it's like when you watch a chocolate ad, right? Like that's like, I laughed because I was with my girls, we're watching YouTube, and it's such a great thing because like all of a sudden this ad pops up and it's of this fake chocolate. And we love chocolate in our household. And my daughter who's 6 looks and she's like, oh, that's fake. And it was like, she even knew. And then it's like, yeah, but if you'd had somebody her age eating a chocolate bar, she'd probably go, oh, I'd love that chocolate. Right. And you just realize that like anything that's fake, we are already kind of like, it's fake. It's not real. And that's where storytelling, you're able to weave in that and build trust, which is what we're all after as businesses, is we're all after building trust.
No, and it's so true, because when we talk about, again, like the storytelling aspect of how we can kind of like overlap that in our personal lives is exactly what you said. When we see advertisements, and that's why when we create content for our clients, that's where the storytelling aspect is, right? Is like, if you have a product, I want to see, again, like, let's say I have this Evian bottle in my hand, like I have a water bottle, like, where is the water from? Okay. So then we shoot in places that are in the mountains, because that's where the water's from. Like, seeing a photo just of a standalone picture, doesn't really do anything for us, right? We want to see ourselves. We want to see ourselves in there. And that's why, there is this, kind of like, we're going in a different direction now, which I'm really loving, which is that authenticity. That's why user generated content is connecting more with people. It's like, well, no, there's no doubt about it. If I'm seeing like, a perfectly cinematic pro video, and I believe there's a time and a place for both, don't get me wrong. But if we're simply trying to tell a story of like, a young girl who's maybe hiking, like if I'm seeing a point of view video and I'm seeing someone like authentically tell the story from their point of view, I'm more likely to be connected to that than seeing like an actor, you know what I mean, that has these lines, and I think that there is this like disconnect sometimes with it. And so that's why that does better. And I think that we're on this like kind of new journey of just showing up, and this idea of everyone having a phone and being able to, film around them and the world around them from their point of view is why people are more connected with that, right?
Yeah. I think it's something that people need to be aware of as well when they're creating their content, that if you portray your product or your service in a particular manner, let's say you're portraying it like you're on top of Everest, but your target audience like doesn't even know they want to scale Everest, and you can actually come alongside them and guide them through the process of like, actually, you could have this as a part of your life, but all you're doing is you're putting that up there. Then there's an expectation that's right off the top. And so I've noticed that quite a bit, that like when you see certain content that's created. And so let's say that you're a food industry. And so you're creating these delicious dishes, but you make them insane for your content that you're creating. Well, that expectation that when you come into that establishment, it should look, when it is set down in front of them, it should look identical. And if it doesn't, then you've tarnished the brand. And again, going back to what we're talking about with brand trust, it's not just like that with food. It's like that in every industry. It's like that in a service that you provide. If you portray this magical, we have actors and we make it look this way and it's filtered and it's all fake and everybody's happy and laughing, blah, blah, and it doesn't happen for that person that exact way. It's just trust. We don't know if we can trust you. And so one of the greatest marketing techniques that we can ever have is when you tell your friend, hey, these guys are awesome. You need to use them. Like obviously we know word of mouth is absolutely essential and powerful. It's also can do the opposite 10 times when we say things like, listen, it wasn't like this at all. I was expecting this and it sucked. It was not that at all. So storytelling is a way that you're able to utilize. And again, we're going back to like doing it in a way that is real. It's authentic. It's you. And again, so it's understanding who you are. Doing it in a very transparent manner, just doing it, just getting out there and starting, trying things out, listening, which is something that we talked about in a previous episode. And then adjusting as you go, being naturally curious to constantly adjust as you go. You will start to see things like your engagement go up with your community, because you realize that you're not creating content that is just hoping to engage with them. It's actually going to, because it's going to be a way that you're building trust with them. They're going to want to see more of your content. And it's also going to take them from maybe knowing a little bit about who you are, or even knowing nothing, to knowing a little bit, to a little bit, to knowing a little bit more. And then to those that are like, I'm ready to actually purchase, they're ready to purchase now. And that, as marketers, when we can gently nudge people along, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, if we could get everybody to leap from knowing nothing about our business to buying, I mean, how rad would that be? But that's not the world we live in. And I think that storytelling is one of the greatest tools that we can use when used properly and when understood properly. It can be one of the greatest tools to getting our ideal audience, our target audience, just one little nudge to the next.
I agree.
Well, thank you so much for everything today, Ali. That was awesome. I love diving into this topic. We could keep going forever on the topic of storytelling, but I think that we've added like a lot of cool tips and tricks and some tools that people can implement and start using in their business today. So before I sign off, why don't we just make sure that we encourage all of you listening to make sure, or watching, to subscribe or to follow wherever you get your podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And Ali, thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining me today.
I had a great time. Yeah, I'll see you on the next one.
I know. Look forward to the next one. Cheers.